Hello, I'm Noam Semel, the Israeli Consul for Cultural Affairs in the United States. Our special guest today is Amos Oz, the distinguished Israeli writer, the recipient of all the major literary awards in Israel. His books were translated into 18 languages and published in 25 countries. He is here in New York to promote his new book in English, To Know a Woman, which has received excellent reviews in the New York Times and other major American press. Shalom, Amos.
Shalom.
To Know a Woman, is it a spy novel?
No, not in the least. It's a novel about a spy, and the main character is a spy, but if anything, it's an anti-spy novel. Namely, in a common, ordinary spy novel, the reader pieces together the information, and toward the end of the novel, of the spy novel, one knows who is the villain and who is the good guy and who did what to whom. This is a novel where the mystery intensifies, where there are no informational answers to the key questions, painful questions in the novel. But toward the end, a different kind of knowledge, maybe a mysterious knowledge, is surfacing. So it's an anti-spy novel about a spy.
Yeah, but Yoel Ravid, the hero of the book, is surrounded by women. His daughter, his ill daughter, at the beginning his wife, of course, until her tragic death, his mother and his mother-in-law. Do you think that the core of his strength is the women in his life? Are the women in his life?
Well, it's the core of his strength and it's the core of his weakness, and I suppose this is the case with all of us, isn't it? But this is the comical dimension of the novel. You use the term tragedy. Yeah. There is a comical dimension. Here is a man who, after the death of his wife, decides to establish a household with all the women in his life. His mother and his mother-in-law, which is the prescription to have a domestic mother of all wars, mother and mother-in-law under the same roof, and his daughter, and a next-door neighbor with whom he is occasionally making love. And there is a bit of a mystery about each one of those. The daughter is epileptic, or maybe just very neurotic. The mother is dying, unless she is just very hypochondriac. The mother-in-law is energetic and vivacious and active, unless she is just very domineering. The next-door neighbor, she is a nymphomaniac, childish nymphomaniac, unless she is secretly a very mature, very understanding, and very generous woman. And even the dead wife, whose ghost is hovering over the book, well, she may have died in an accident, but maybe it was a suicide. She may have formerly taken a lover, but maybe he was just a friendly next-door neighbor. All those mysteries do not dissolve, they intensify, and they provide for a comic-tragical quality in the novel.
Why it's so important to know a woman, Amos?
Because unless you know the essential women in your life, you don't know the first thing about yourself, and this works both ways, of course. You happen to be a woman, unless you know immensely well a couple of men, you don't even know yourself, and it goes beyond that. It's recognizing the woman that is in every man and the man that is in every woman. It's facing the fact that every man has a feminine aspect inside him. Very difficult for an Israeli macho man involved in the most secret and allegedly romantic exploits of the Secret Service to accept that there is a feminine quality, a feminine aspect in himself, just as there is a masculine feminine quality in every woman. This getting to terms with the other sex inside yourself is in some ways the essence of to know a woman.
You gave an interview in Israel and you said to the Israeli journalists that you would like to be a woman for 1 month, 1 week. Why?
Well, I feel deprived. There is a whole scale of human experiences which I am destined not to experience ever. I am dying to know, to experience once or twice, what is giving birth like, pregnancy, breastfeeding, menstruation, female orgasm, all those things I'm deprived of. I think it's kind of unfair.
When you write a novel, like To Know a Woman, you are sitting in your home in Arad, in the Negev, and you write it, and you're doing it alone, or you share the experience with somebody?
Oh no, it's the most solitude work. I don't share anything. I don't even let people know what the novel is all about.
Even not your family, your wife?
No, it's
your
strictly, in the early phase at least, until I have a draft, it's strictly private. I hardly talk about it with myself, if you see what I mean. I just shut up and work.
I see.
Sometimes the characters, the fictitious characters, will say to me, you shut up and write.
How long does it take to you to write a novel?
Years.
Years?
Anything between 2.5 years and 5-6 years on some case.
So how do you explain the fact that during the last 4 or 5 years, I understand that 4 books has been published in Israel?
One of them was a collection of political essays which I wrote over the years and were put together. I didn't put any spatial work on these.
I see.
And then in the last 4 years there were 2 novels really. To Know a Woman and the Third Condition.
I see. But on the other hand, you said before that when you write it alone without sharing the experience with your family. So for years you sit in your studio, you write a novel, and nobody knows what you are doing?
At least until I have the first draft, I'm always reluctant to expose my own pregnancy to X-rays. It's not good for the baby.
I see. Again, you're using an experience. How do you compare the time that you're alone writing the book and the time that you are promoting the book? Because in very few, let's say, since the book is published, you have to promote it, you have to give interviews, and you have to share the experience with the whole world.
Well, it is like for a secret agent to be suddenly exposed. It's a very strange experience. It's a very sharp contrast to the solitude with which I conceive the novel and create it. But in a way it's fun, you know. It's such a total contrast to my daily routine that I secretly enjoy it even when it's difficult.
I see. The names of the women in the novel, The Know a Woman, the daughter, her name is Ivria, means Hebrew.
That's the wife, Ivria.
The wife, Ivria. Yes. And Abigail is the name of King David's wives. And the only name which is not a Hebrew name is the name of your mother, the mother of Yoel, which is, her name is Lisa.
Yes.
She's a Holocaust survivor from Romania. Did you think about it when you decided to give the names?
Well, of course I did. I'm going to leave something to the critics, but I'll give you a clue. The only people who are not Israeli natives in this novel, moreover, the only people in this novel who are not Mayflower people in terms of Israel are Yoel and his former boss, the chief of the Secret Service. Both of them are Holocaust survivors. Both of them are transplants, really, who try harder, who are immensely ambitious about making it all the way to the top. I'll give you that much for a clue, but the rest of the business of sorting out the names, we should leave something to the critics, or else they starve. And if they starve, they hate me. And if they hate me, I'm in a big, big trouble.
What is your response to the critic? Because in Israel, we know it's a very small country, and everybody knows each other. In America, it's another situation. For To Know a Woman, and you received wonderful reviews for the other books that were published here in America. And I know about Israel. In Israel, you know the person who is behind the critic. In America, you don't know. Normally, you don't know the person. What is your reaction to it?
I have to love them all, or else I'll be in a spot, you know. But I've always believed that it's wrong for an author to argue with the critics. They are the critics. Above them, there is a higher legal authority, namely the readers, and above the readers, there is time. And time is the supreme court of justice for literature. So the critics are like the district court of justice, so to speak. And I respect this court of justice, even when I disrespect it.
Okay, because we are not now in the High Court, I would like you to read from the new book, To Know a Woman. If you can, I can ask your permission, please, if you can read a little bit in Hebrew, and then, of course, in English.
I will, and bear in mind that a translation of a work of art is like playing a violin concerto on the piano. It can be done provided you never try to force the piano to produce the sounds of the violin. This is grotesque.
Okay, a concert with Amos Oz.
All right.
To Know a Woman.
Violin first. Hebrew. This is from chapter 8. שתי ציפורים על גדר ביום גשם. אדם זקן מדבר אל עצמו בתחנת האוטובוס ברחוב עזה. אלה וכאלה נראו בעיניו מרתקים יותר מכל מה שהתנסה בו בעבודתו. בעצם ראה את עצמו כמין מעריך וקניין של סחורה אבסטרקטית. נוסע היה לחוץ לארץ, לפגוש אדם זר בבית קפה בפריז למשל, או במונטריאול או בגלסגו, מנהל שיחה או שיחות ומגיע לידי מסקנה. עיקר העניין היה בהתרשמות, בתביעת העין, בשיפוט אופי, וכן בעמידה סבלנית על המקח. I'll switch now into English. The same paragraph. Two birds on a fence on a rainy day. An old man talking to himself at the bus stop on the Gaza road. These and similar events seemed to him more fascinating than anything that had happened to him in his work. In fact, he saw himself as a kind of valuator and purchaser of abstract merchandise. He would go abroad to meet a stranger in a cafe in Paris, for example, or Montreal or Glasgow, have a conversation or two, and then come to a conclusion. The important things were sensitivity to impressions, intuitive judgment, character assessment, and patient bargaining skills. It had never so much as occurred to him to jump over walls or leap from roof to roof. He saw himself as a long-established merchant with many years' experience in bargaining, arranging deals, building mutual confidence, outlining guarantees and securities, but over and above all, forming an accurate impression of the people he talked with. As you can see for yourself, Noam, there are certain limited similarities between what a secret agent is doing for a living, at least as I conceive it, and between what a storyteller is doing. Namely, perception, observation, attentiveness, hence the spy as a metaphor for the writer.
I see. But you know, I want to ask you a question about the response in America to this book and the response in Israel. Every new book, including The No Woman and the new book, is a common experience in Israel. I mean, one of your books. Everybody reads the book. Those who didn't read the book will say, we'll read the book. Those who will never read the book will say, we have an opinion about the book. Everybody has to say something about the book. So you meet the people in the streets and you can discuss with them about the book. And everybody knows what does it mean, the Mossad. What, if you compare it to the American response?
Well, there is a totally different cultural tradition, a different concept of what literature is all about. You see, in this country, people regard writers as fine and subtle entertainers, and literature, in the last analysis, is a form of entertainment, the most subtle one. In the Israeli tradition, in the Jewish tradition, I should say in the Jewish-Slavonic tradition, writers and poets are regarded as the heirs of the prophets, right or wrong, and they are expected to have some kind of a knowledge. Where have we gone wrong? Where do we go from here? If they cannot deliver, they should be expected to get stoned in the marketplace, at least metaphorically. It's a totally different tradition. Here people read for enjoyment. In Israel, they sometimes read for rage.
I see. You know, here in America, they read books if the book becomes a film or TV drama or a theater play. And then the shops are full with the books and people are going to the shops and they buy the books. In Israel, it's another system. In Israel, people are buying the books, and everybody in Israel know about every book that you wrote because, as I said before, even if he didn't read it, he knew or he knows there is a book, a new book of Amos Oz. At the beginning of the 70s, one of your novels became a movie, My Michael. I remember a wonderful play that was done based on elsewhere, perhaps, at the Kamari Theater of Tel Aviv, and there was another play at another Tel Aviv theater, Finch Theater, based on Mavet. That's right. And let's speak about your novels becoming a movie, becoming a film. My Michael. Was it the first film to be?
Yes, that was the first one, and I was very, very apprehensive. I thought it's impossible to transplant literature into cinema to begin with. Particularly this novel, which I thought was anti-filmic, because it is so introverted. because it is so limited in outward events. It's an inward drama. So I think what Dan Wallman did in producing this film was a relative success and a striking one.
The novel at that time was very fashionable, and every girl, every woman in Israel, you could see them in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem and in Haifa walking with the novel and identifying with the character of the woman in the novel and then in the movie. We have with us some clips from the movie. We would like to show our viewers, and maybe you can tell us a little bit the story of the movie, and it's Efrat Lavi and Oded Kotler and some other Israeli actors under the direction of Dan Volman, My Michael, based on the novel of Amos Oz.
לפני אלפי שנים הים כיסה את כל האזור הזה, את הרי יהודה, את ירושלים, כל המקום הזה. ובשכבות הגיאולוגיות יש סימנים ברורים שמעידים על העובדה הזאת. יש שרידים מאובנים של דגים, שיניים של קרישים, בבית זית גילו ממש עקבות של דינוזאורים.
אבל זה לא מה ששאלתי אותך. שאלתי אותך מאיפה אתה יודע שאני ירושלמית.
תראי, עלייך אני לא יודע הרבה. גיאולוגיה אני יודע קצת, ואני רציתי לעשות עלייך רושם. אבל אני לא יודע עלייך הרבה, אני לא יודע עלייך כלום מלבד זה שנפל במדרגות קודם.
חנה, הבירה שלנו נהדרת, את מוכרחה לבוא. 2 חדרים גדולים ברחביה, ממש מעל המכולת. מה יש? מה את מחייכת? שום דבר. יש לך איזה סוד.
Amos, what is the story of My Michael?
There's something about this novel which will surprise me and astonish me forever, about the reception of this novel. It's a very homely domestic novel about how the marriage between two well-meaning, very average intellectuals goes wrong. It's about the gap between the real world, which is very dreary, very everyday, very routine, and the painful and wild fantasies, sexual fantasies, of an unsatisfied woman. Now that this novel became a household asset in every house in Israel, and hit perhaps an unprecedented chord in so many Israeli readers, that it had been translated into 17 or 18 languages, and was significant to readers in faraway places such as Japan and Scandinavia and Latin America and Africa. You know, sometimes I get to the conclusion that real literature, the more provincial, the more parochial, the more local it is, the more universal, not international, not cosmopolitan, but universal it may get.
I agree with you, because all the Israelis that tried to do movies, for example, in English, didn't succeed. The only Israeli movies that succeeded until now were movies that were done in Hebrew, with Israeli actors, based on Israeli stories.
It's simple. You write or make a film about hotels and international airports. They will be both in airports and hotels, read in airports and hotels, and left and forgotten in airports and hotels. But if you write about St. Petersburg in the 19th century, or about Oxford, Mississippi in the deep south of America, or about a couple in Jerusalem, it stands a chance to hit a chord everywhere, to touch a nerve. And in a mysterious way, this novel, in a different way, Now to Know a Woman, seems to be touching a novel with very, very seemingly faraway readers.
Amos, what about the fantasy world of this woman from My Michael?
Well, she fantasizes, as you can see in a minute, about a pair of Arab twins whom she only knew when she was a little girl. They are not actually in the novel, they are in their fantasies. And these are sexual fantasies, sensual fantasies. That was part of the scandalizing impact of this novel when it was published in Israel. How can a nice Jewish girl fantasize about Arab twins? In some respects, they are fragments of her imagination, the same way sometimes black people are in novels by William Faulkner.
I see. Okay, so we'll see another clip from My Michael, based on the novel of Amos Oz.
מיכאל, תגיד משהו. די! תפסיק לשתוק כל הימים. תפסיק לחיות מיום ליום כמו שעון מעורר.
חנה, רגעי.
בשביל מה אתה חי בכלל, תגיד לי?
חנה, אנשים לא חיים בשביל. אנשים חיים. נקודה.
Your literature is deeply rooted in the Israeli experience. Your characters are very much a part of Israeli society and contemporary social and political events, such as all the Israeli wars are an important element in almost all of your works. For example, in To Know a Woman. The Lebanon War serves as a background for the book. Is it important for literature to reflect the social and political realities of its time?
No, I resent the term reflect. I think literature is not in the business of reflecting, at least not novels and stories. When I want to make a clear statement on how I feel on my government's policies, I make a clear statement. I don't write a novel. I have never written a story or a novel as a vehicle for promoting a political idea. The war in Lebanon, which infuriated me. Yeah. I wrote a collection of essays called The Slopes of Lebanon, in which I said exactly how I felt about the Israeli policy, how I felt about the opposition. I told my government what to do, not that they listen. Sometimes I tell them where to go altogether. When I write a novel, the characters have politics. Or sometimes, like Yoel in To Know a Woman, they turn their backs to politics. This is political. Even turning one's back to politics is political. But I have never submitted a novel to a political urge in me. I would never do that.
Yeah, but the war, the Lebanon exists in the book, according to my opinion. The boyfriend of Yoel's daughter is speaking all the time about his experience in the Lebanon war. So when an Israeli reader is reading it, for him, when you mention the Lebanon war, all of a sudden, all the reflection of the war is entering to your feelings, you understand? So it's something that, do you think about it when you write it? Do you write according to wars, like we are living in Israel, we are counting, you know, we are measuring our life before 67, after 67, before 48, after 48?
No, Noam, there is something which Americans may find difficult to understand. To us Israelis, history is biography. Wars, intervals between wars, diplomatic changes, political changes are part of our very private in our bedrooms, so to speak. It's not out there across the ocean. It's not something that happens in the other part of the world and we may be or not may be involved through the screen of the TV. It's part of the most inner tissues of personal experience. As such, they are reflected in my novels, but not in the sense of the novels being a statement. The novels are not taking sides.
Even the new one, the third condition, that was published 2 weeks before the war broke out, the Gulf War. As a war, the Intifada exists as a background of the book, although it was published 2 weeks before another war.
You know, the Intifada exists in the third condition entirely in the protagonist's head. There is not a single scene of stone throwing in the third condition. There is not a single Arab in the third condition. I don't say this proudly. It's just a fact. It only exists as a component of the protagonist's internal world, same way in which those Arab twins in my Michael, in the film and in the novel, only exist as segments of Hannah's imagination.
I see. Can we say that you are examining the conflict between the Israel and the Arabs not through your novels, but through your activity in politics.
No, I examine the Israeli-Arab conflicts in both ways. But as a storyteller, I examine the psychic impact, the psychic connotations and results. As a political writer, as a political essayist, I take sides. I have an alternative idea about where Israel ought to go, and I make it loud and clear. It's an open society.
During the late war, let's say, you were with some other Israeli writers, A.B. Yoshua and Yehuda Amichai, and you issued a letter, and you went to the Hilton Hotel in Tel Aviv, and you gave a press meeting to all the press in the world. What did you want to say?
Well, I know this again may sound somewhat strange to liberals and peaceniks in America. I was saying that I'm a peacenik, not a pacifist. Namely, for pacifists, the ultimate evil is war itself, no matter how. They'd rather die than fight a war. I'm a peacenik. I'm not a pacifist. I'm not in the business of turning the other cheek. Turning the other cheek is a very sweet concept, as long as it is someone else's other cheek. I thought this particular war in the Gulf had to be fought and had to be won if there is to be peace in the Middle East. And there are a couple of causes for which I have fought in the past on the battlefield, for which I'm ready to fight if necessary, not happily, and for which I'll fight like a devil, because without achieving those goals there will be no peace. Saddam Hussein was becoming a danger not to Israel, but first and foremost to moderate trends in the Arab world and among the Palestinians. And as a pro-peace person, I wanted him to be beaten.
But you issued that letter also against or towards those anti-war demonstrators in Germany, in Britain, in France, and of course in America.
Well, that's a painful business, having to argue with your own ideological brethren, the peace movements in Europe and in North America. But this argument had to come to the open. There is a certain tendency to treat the Israeli peace movement as a younger sister of the anti-Vietnam phenomenon here in America during the years of Vietnam. Now, it's a different ballgame. Sometimes in this country I have a hard time stopping veterans of the anti-war phenomenon from hugging me for the wrong reasons. Whereas during the Vietnam War, the anti-war people in this country maintained that America was involved in Vietnam in the wrong war, against the wrong enemy for the wrong reasons, and had to pull out of Vietnam immediately and at all costs, which, by the way, I endorse.
Yeah.
There is no one among the Israeli peaceniks who thinks that the enemy is unreal, or that the war is being fought for nothing. There is no question of unilateral withdrawal from the West Bank and Gaza, and certainly not without prior conditions. It's a much more complex game in terms of the Israeli-Arab conflict.
I see. What about your brothers, as you call them, the Jewish writers like Arthur Miller and Susan Sontag and some others, that you know they issued another letter in the New York Times against Israel, maybe against Israel, I'm not sure, but the letter was during the time of war, during the time when the Israelis were in the sealed rooms or in the shelters, and they defended some other people.
Well, I don't think, to be fair to them, I don't think it was a letter against Israel. It was a critical letter. And I am not one of those Israelis who get hysterical when the country is being criticized. I think we are an open society. I think we can take criticism from within and from outside. And in fact, I don't think we ought to be in the business of lowering down our voices when we disagree. Hence, the others may listen to us, the non-Jews may listen to us. Argument, rift, disagreement is an integral part of our cultural heritage, all the way back to the prophets. There's one thing, however. I think it would be nice if Israel-oriented American Jews, when they want to criticize Israel, will never fail to state their gut solidarity with Israel while criticizing it. Never assume that this gut solidarity is taken for granted. And if they happen not to have a gut solidarity, they can still criticize Israel, but let them not criticize Israel any more than they would have criticized the Philippines, unless they have this gut solidarity. Otherwise, I don't mind taking criticism. If I agree with the criticism, I endorse it. If I don't, I'd scream back. What's wrong with that?
Okay, so I will ask you another question about it. I feel, as an Israeli, there is an ideological divide between Israel and culture, between Israel and America, between Israel and American Jewry, something like between Babylon and Jerusalem. Do you feel something like that?
Well, I think there is a certain ambivalence there. There is a family kinship. there is a sense of solidarity, but deep down below there is a tension, simply because if Israel becomes a spectacular success story, it will be a threat to the American Jewry in the way of attracting their offspring, and vice versa. If the American Jewish experience is a marvelous one, and I don't mean materially, spiritually, if it's a marvelous one, it will become even more attractive to young Israelis. So this subterranean tension is there. Let's face it, admit it, and learn how to live with it. It's not the end of the world that there is some contest between two cultural centers of the Jewish people in our time. And I don't mind this.
It's not a disaster, but it's a fact that in Israel, people do not know about it, you know. They do not know that 60 or 70% of the Jewish people here in America ignore the existence of the State of Israel, or do not care about the existence of the State of Israel.
Or expect the State of Israel to make them feel good.
Yeah, maybe.
If the Israeli government would here, American Jews would applaud this hawkish act. If, on the other hand, the Israeli government would have proposed midnight tonight to make monumental very happy. Now, it's not enough for a family relationship to just expect the other member of the family to make you happy all the time, to make you feel good in front of others. And here I am in the business I've always been trying to somewhat deepen this interrelationship, to maybe switch it from the strictly political down to the cultural. Every American Jew has opinions about the Israeli government and politics and reshuffling the coalition and things like that. I wish the literature would penetrate deeper, the culture. All in all, you know, the day Israel is finally removed forever from the front pages of all the newspapers, and instead Israel conquers, occupies, and annexes the literary supplement, the music supplement, the sports supplement, the gardening supplement, then I would say that we have made it. Science. Then I'd say that we have made it. We have arrived away from the front pages and into the supplements.
But spiritually, with the Jewish people, we have a problem, because you and me, we are speaking now English, and we know that most of the Jews in the world, they don't speak Hebrew, and we didn't succeed with the Hebrew language, and mainly the writers, because the Jewish writers during the 19th century, they wrote in Hebrew, and the American writers, they write in English, except one poet, Gabriel Pryl. I think he's the only one in America who writes Hebrew. So it's a problem for us.
Well, look, let's face it. Hebrew has been, in the last 2,000 years, at best, the language of the minority of Jews. Even when many writers wrote in Hebrew, the very same writers would speak other languages, mostly Yiddish. I am very content with the fact that the number of Hebrew speakers worldwide grew in the first 40 years of this century from a few thousand to 500,000, and in my own lifetime from 500,000 to close to 6 million in Israel. I'm aware of the fact that there are more speakers of Hebrew in the world now than speakers of Norwegian. Are you aware of the fact that there are more speakers of Hebrew now in Israel and abroad than the overall world number of speakers of English in the times of William Shakespeare? By which I'm not implying that every single Israeli writer is a Shakespeare. We have no more than half a dozen of those in Tel Aviv right now. But it is a spectacular success story, and that's how I view it. I do have a missionary zeal in me to try to make more and more people, Jews and non-Jews, outside Israel, fascinated by Hebrew. But the only way to make Hebrew attractive and fascinating is to have more and more cultural activity and creation in that language.
I agree with you, and that's the reason I'm not worried about those Russian Jews that are coming to Israel, and some of them are leaving Israel, but I'm saying after 6 months or 12 months, at least they will know basic elements in Hebrew. 6 months ago, Shimon Peres, the head of the Labour Party, the opposition in Israel, offered you the idea to be a nominee to lead the Labour Party for the next elections. What is your response?
Well, yes, I had my name mentioned as a kind of candidate for Prime Minister, and strangely enough, by the present leader of the opposition. I say that the country must be in a very desperate condition if they think of me as a Prime Minister. I know that some writers, Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia, became presidents. You know, maybe if you offered me Czechoslovakia, I'd take it. But Israel is unrulable anyway, certainly beyond me.
But do you think the writer has any influence on the political life of Israel?
Well, I think writers have a role and always had a role. This again has to do with the Jewish-Slavonic tradition where people listen very carefully to what writers say. I think it's important that writers raise their voices, especially when language is being abused and degenerated by politicians. I think writers should also attract the attention of their peoples to the existence of the other, to how the other half feel. This other half being sometimes women, sometimes minorities, sometimes political rivals, sometimes the enemy. But let us not overestimate the actual influence of writers. You know, even the prophets, the biblical prophets, have not done marvelously well in changing the opinions of the kings. It would be unrealistic to expect my generation of writers and poets in Israel to do better than the prophets in influencing the politicians.
But I know that you and A.B. Yoshua went to meet Shimon Peres and Rabin when they were in power, when Rabin was Minister of Defense and Peres was
I've
Prime
met
Minister.
every single Israeli Prime Minister with the
Including
exception
Shamir?
of one, yes. And I have more prime ministerial hours than any poet or writer in this country could have dreamt of presidential hours.
Yes.
Mileage with prime ministers. Well, this is all very nice, the kind of attention, the fact that prime ministers, including those who belong in a totally different political part of the spectrum, are interested in what I have to say. But I do not delude myself. They'd offer me a nice cup of coffee or a drink in their private homes and ask me sometimes, where have we gone wrong? Where do the nation go from here? They would admire my answers, but then ignore them completely. So I'm quite sober about the actual leverage. It's nice, however, that writers and poets in Israel are regarded as significant voices. Here in America, I suppose most American presidents, if they had a gun aimed at them and given 3 minutes to think of the names of the 2 leading poets of America in this time, they will say, forget the 3 minutes, shoot right away.
Yeah. So before we are shooting, let's go back to Know Woman.
Yes.
I have here in my hands the 2 books, I mean the Hebrew version and the English version. But, are you involved in the cover of the book?
Yes, in some cases I am,
Yeah.
and I'm very content with the American jacket
Yeah.
of this book.
Yeah. Because there is a difference between the Israeli version and the American
but
version.
I mean, let's not talk about the package. Let's
Yeah.
talk about the book content.
Yeah.
I am as happy with the translation as I can be. Of
I
course, it's different, but it still is, to me, a very meaningful novel, even in the English translation. And it still carries a certain significance, I believe, for every human being. It is a novel that has something to say, I believe, to every middle-aged man, or to everyone who thinks of middle age. It is something that have to be significant to every woman who wants to know something about the internal inner life of a man beyond the facade of bravado and manliness. So it's not just a novel that ought to be attractive to Israel-oriented audiences. It's a novel that I believe could be meaningful for every receptive human being.
I agree with you. And I agree with you about the new novel that you wrote in Hebrew, The Third Condition. When this novel will be translated into English and will be published in America?
I can't guarantee anything, you know.
Yeah.
I've done my share in this, but I hope in 2 years or so it will be available in English.
So it takes 2 years to translate
That's
and
the
to
average.
publish. And
The translation takes about a year, and then the production takes several months.
it's a pity, you know, because the book is dealing with the most sensitive issues of the Israeli society. And as you said before, it's international influence, and it's a pity because I know that people are waiting for the new book. I mean, in America.
I wouldn't worry
How can
too
you
much.
shorten the period?
Well, I can't answer
You
that.
can cut it.
I can't answer that, but I wouldn't worry too much. I think even a timely book, if it is a good one, it remains meaningful days and years and decades after the actual events referred to in that novel. After all, I mean, Dostoevsky's St. Petersburg is bygone, the regime, the government, the everything. But we still read Dostoevsky with the thrill and the fascination of current events, really. You know, I'm not daring to compare myself to Dostoevsky, but I wouldn't worry too much about the competing with the newspapers. I'm not in the business of competing with the newspapers,
Okay.
catching up with the news.
So what is are you working on a new novel?
Yes, I am, but I'm not going to tell you even remotely what it is all about, because as I said earlier, it's not good for my pregnancy to be exposed to X-rays. So I'd leave you guessing on this. But yes, I am working.
To Know Woman, the new book of Amos Oz, translated from Hebrew by Nicholas Delange, and published by Harcourt-based Jovanovich. Thank you very much, Amos Oz. It was a great pleasure to have you in our studio.
Thank you, Noam. Shalom.
Thank you very much, and Shavua Tov.